On a humid morning in June 1971, a frantic farmer in the remote mountains of Fujian province stumbled upon a slaughterhouse disguised as a home. Inside, a mother and her young daughter lay butchered, the air thick with the metallic scent of death. But the father was missing, and 3 cups of tea sat undisturbed on the table. Who came for dinner and left a bloodbath? Before we enter the crime scene, please consider subscribing to support the channel. The story begins in Anhe Village, located within Chungcheong County, Fujian Province. In the early 1970s, this region was a tapestry of dense forests and rolling hills, a place where agricultural rhythms dictated life and neighbors knew one another's business intimately. It was an era before surveillance cameras or advanced forensic technology, a time when justice relied heavily on human intuition and the preservation of physical evidence. When a crime occurred here, it shattered the peace of the entire community. On the morning of June 11, 1971, the sun had just begun to burn off the mountain mist. At approximately 6:30 in the morning, a local farmer named She Wangjiang, 35 years of age, was making his way toward the home of his neighbor and close friend, Huang Huanu. The 2 men had planned to work the fields together that day, a common arrangement in the cooperative farming culture of the time. According to Xie, the front door of the Huang residence was unlocked. This was not unusual for the village, where trust ran high and crime was low. Xie called out for his friend, expecting the familiar grunt of a morning greeting or the clatter of breakfast dishes. Instead, he was met with a heavy, suffocating silence. He stepped across the threshold, calling out again, but the house remained still. As she moved deeper into the residence, a pungent, copper-scented odor assaulted his senses. It was a smell that triggers a primal alarm in the human brain, the unmistakable stench of fresh blood. Panic began to set in. The house felt wrong. It was too quiet, too still. His eyes scanned the dimly lit interior until they locked onto a terrifying sight. A thick, dark trail of blood smeared across the floor, leading ominously toward the small sleeping quarters. Driven by a mix of dread and adrenaline, she followed the grisly path into the bedroom. There, the nightmare revealed itself. Lying motionless on the bed were 2 figures. It was Huang's wife, Wei Qiandi, and their young daughter. Jie rushed to the bedside, his hands trembling as he checked for signs of life. But the skin was cold to the touch. The breath had long since left them. Terrified, she scrambled out of the house, his scream shattering the morning calm as he alerted the neighbors before sprinting to the local police station to report the atrocity. The Chungcheong County Police received the report with immediate gravity. She Wangjiang arrived at the station breathless, his demeanor one of sheer panic. To the veteran officers on duty, his frantic state suggested a catastrophe. They wasted no time assembling a team. However, by the time investigators arrived at the scene in Anhe Village, the situation had already begun to deteriorate in a way that often plagues rural investigations. News of the slaughter had spread through the village like wildfire. A crowd of nearly 20 villagers had gathered outside the Huang home, their morbid curiosity overriding the need for preservation. Some had even ventured inside, trampling through the entryway and peering into the rooms. For the forensic team, this was a disaster. The crime scene, the sacred ground of any investigation, had been contaminated. Footprints were overlaid, objects potentially shifted, and the ambient environment altered. The police immediately moved to cordon off the area, pushing the crowd back to establish a perimeter. But the damage to the initial integrity of the scene was a concern they would have to work around. The investigators turned their attention to the bedroom, the epicenter of the violence. The victims were identified as 30-year-old Wei Qiandi and her 3-year-old daughter, Xiao Ya. The forensic pathologist's initial examination provided a grim timeline. Rigor mortis and body temperature suggested that both mother and child had died the previous evening, likely between 7 and 8 o'clock on June 10th. The cause of death for both was catastrophic trauma, but the nature of the wounds told two very different stories. Wei Qiandi had been obliterated. Her body bore nearly 20 distinct wounds, a frenzied map of violence scattered across her forehead, face, chest, and abdomen. The attack had been savage and uncontrolled. Several wounds overlapped, indicating the killer had struck the same spot repeatedly in a blind rage. The fatal blow had been delivered to her left chest. The force was so immense that it had crushed the ribcage. Her face had been destroyed, her nose, lips, and chin were split open, rendering her features nearly unrecognizable. She was dressed in long sleepwear, without undergarments, suggesting she had been preparing for bed or was already resting. Her left hand rested protectively over her daughter, while her right arm hung limp toward the floor. Despite the lack of undergarments, the medical examiner found no evidence of sexual assault. This detail was crucial. It shifted the potential motive away from a sexual predator and towards something personal or financial. The weapon used on Wei Qiandi was consistent with a heavy, bladed instrument, likely an axe. The depth and width of the gashes required significant mass and momentum. Beside her lay little Xiao Ya. The 3-year-old had suffered fewer wounds, but they were no less lethal. She had been struck in the abdomen, the force sufficient to cause immediate fatal injury. However, the pathology report noted a critical discrepancy. The wounds on the child were cleaner, narrower, and consistent with a sharp, piercing object, likely a knife. This duality of weapons, an axe for the mother and a knife for the child, raised a harrowing question. Were there two killers, each wielding a different weapon? Or was there a single perpetrator who switched weapons in the middle of the assault? The distribution of violence offered a psychological profile of the attacker. Wei Qiandi had absorbed the brunt of the rage. The overkill, the 20 wounds, the destruction of the face suggested deep-seated hatred. This was not a professional hit or a robbery gone wrong where a victim is silenced quickly. This was personal. The killer wanted to erase her identity. By contrast, the attack on the child, while horrific, appeared more functional, perhaps to eliminate a witness or as collateral damage to a primary objective. The scene itself offered more contradictions. Both victims were found in positions that suggested they had been asleep or lying down when the attack began. Wei Qiandi's legs were straight. The child was tucked beside her. A thin blanket was folded neatly next to the girl, and the bed showed no signs of a violent struggle. There were no defensive wounds on Wei Qiandi's hands or arms. This lack of resistance baffled the detectives. If the attack occurred between 7 and 8 in the evening, it was relatively early. Would a mother be sleeping so soundly that she wouldn't react to the first blow? Or did she know her killer? Was she taken by surprise by someone she trusted? Someone she allowed into her most private sanctuary? The room was claustrophobic, a small box of a space separated from the rest of the house, not by a solid door, but by a tattered bamboo curtain. This curtain became a focal point of the investigation. Investigators found dried blood smeared on the fabric. The splatter pattern suggested that the killer, hands drenched in blood after the act, had pushed the curtain aside to exit the room. To the side of the bed was a small ventilation window, hardly a foot square, covered by an old screen. Police examined the exterior wall beneath this window for footprints or scuff marks, but found nothing. The window was simply too small for an average adult to squeeze through, ruling it out as an entry or exit point. The killer had walked in through the front door. The motive of robbery initially seemed plausible. The bedroom and the main living areas had been ransacked. Clothes pockets were turned inside out. Drawers were pulled open, and contents were strewn across the floor. On the floor, amidst the chaos, lay a torn banknote stained with blood and a discarded cloth bag. Locals identified the bag as a common money pouch sold at the village market, likely belonging to Wei Qiandi. However, the robbery theory had holes. In the living room, on a wooden table, sat 3 cups. One was empty and dry. The other 2 still contained tea. This was the smoking gun that shifted the perspective of the entire case. In rural Chinese culture, Serving tea is a ritual of hospitality. You do not serve tea to a burglar, you serve tea to a guest. The presence of these cups suggested that on the evening of the murder, the Huang family had visitors. The scene painted a chilling picture. The killer or killers had likely sat at this table, conversing and drinking tea with the victims, perhaps only minutes before unleashing the slaughter. Investigators combed the exterior of the property. In the courtyard, they found a blood-stained axe discarded on the ground. It matched the wound patterns on Wei Qiandi perfectly. This confirmed the primary murder weapon, but the knife used to kill the child was nowhere to be found. As the police processed the scene, a glaring absence hung over the investigation. Huang Huan, the husband and father. He was nowhere to be found. Neighbors described Huang as a hard-working man who made his living farming and raising livestock. He was the pillar of the family, with deep roots in the area. His parents and in-laws lived nearby. He was not a drifter. So, where was he? Two theories immediately crystallized. The first was that Huang Huanu was the perpetrator. Perhaps a domestic dispute had spiraled into a family annihilation, and he had fled to escape justice. The second was that Huang was a third victim, abducted or killed by the same intruders who butchered his family. Investigators interviewed Xiao Rui, a neighbor who lived adjacent to the crime scene. When shown the bloodied axe found in the courtyard, she identified it immediately. "That belongs to Huang," she told police. "I've borrowed it many times to chop wood." The fact that the murder weapon belonged to the household supported the domestic violence theory. It suggested a crime of opportunity, grabbing a weapon close at hand, rather than a premeditated hit involving brought-in tools. Wei Qiandi's sister provided testimony that further darkened the suspicion against the missing husband. She revealed that the marriage was volatile. They fought constantly, she said. It was a Cold War marriage, punctuated by days of silence and explosive arguments. Wei Qiandi would frequently retreat to her parents' home, complaining of beatings. Huang would inevitably follow, pleading for her return and apologizing profusely. But the cycle would always repeat. The sister recalled a chilling prophecy Wei Qiandi had once uttered in despair. "One day, I will die by his hand." The village began to turn on Huang Huanu. The narrative was easy to construct. The abusive husband finally snapped, killed his wife and child, and ran. The villagers, fueled by indignation and grief, mobilized to help the police hunt him down. They scoured the hills, the fields, and the forests, demanding justice for the mother and child. But the hunt yielded a result no one expected. More than 24 hours after the discovery of the bodies, a search party scanning the river near the village spotted something caught in the reeds. It was a body. It was Huang Huana. The police pulled him from the water. The forensic examination revealed no external injuries, no axe wounds, no stab marks. The cause of death was drowning. His clothes were stained with blood, but the river had washed much of it away. The time of death was estimated to be shortly after the murders of his wife and daughter. The discovery of Huang's body forced a complete recalibration of the investigation. The fugitive killer theory evolved into a murder-suicide theory. Had Huang killed his family in a rage, then, overcome with guilt or fear, thrown himself into the river? It seemed a tidy conclusion. Case closed. But the lead detective wasn't satisfied. Several details didn't align with the suicide. First, the toxicology report returned a strange finding. Both Wei Qiandi and Huang Huanu had traces of sleeping pills in their systems. The dosage was not lethal, just enough to induce drowsiness or deep sleep. Why would a man planning a violent murder-suicide sedate himself? If he wanted to kill himself, why not take a lethal dose? Why drown himself? Second, the psychological profile was inconsistent. While Huang and his wife fought, his relationship with his daughter, Xiao Ya, was described by everyone as adoring. In a culture that often prioritized sons, Huang doted on his daughter. Witnesses saw them playing happily in the yard on the very morning of the murder. He took her everywhere, to the fields, to markets, to social gatherings. He bought her treats he couldn't afford. Would a man who loved his child so openly butcher her with a knife? Furthermore, the ransacking of the house bothered the investigators. If Huang had killed his family and then committed suicide, why fake a robbery? And if he was running away with the money, why leave the money behind and jump in a river? The looting looked performative, staged to look like a burglary, but executed with a chaotic energy that didn't match a man resigning himself to death. The police decided to widen the net. If Huang didn't kill his family, then the killer was still out there. And if the killer was still out there, they had staged the scene to frame a dead man. The investigators returned to the 3 teacups. If Huang didn't kill his family, then the guests who drank that tea were the prime suspects. The police needed to find out who had visited the Huang farmhouse on the night of June 10th. They began to interview the villagers again, looking for anyone who had seen strangers or unusual activity. This time, the information came from Xie Wangjiang, the friend who had discovered the bodies. Xie offered a new lead, one that pointed away from the village and toward the criminal element. He told police that Huang had recently sold a herd of livestock and had come into a significant sum of cash. A few days prior, Xi and Huang had gone to a tavern in town for a drink. According to Xie, Huang had been reckless, flashing a thick wad of bills when paying for the alcohol. I told him to put it away, Xie claimed, playing the part of the responsible friend, but he wouldn't listen. He was showing off. Xie described a group of young men at a nearby table who had fixated on the money. Their eyes had followed the cash, and they had watched the 2 men leave. She claimed that on the walk home, he felt they were being followed and had urged Huang to walk faster. He even mentioned that Huang had told him the next day that a young man had been seen lurking near the Huang property. This testimony was a lifeline for the investigation. It provided a motive, robbery, a suspect profile, a gang of youths, and an explanation for the ransacked house. It fit the physical evidence of the teacups less perfectly. Would Huang serve tea to a gang of thugs? But perhaps they had used a ruse to gain entry. The police focused their energy on finding this tavern gang. The description was vague, but in a small county, a group of 5 young men with money to burn stood out. Investigators visited the tavern Xi had mentioned. The owner confirmed that a group of delinquents frequented the place. They were led by a 26-year-old named Zhao Lishang. The tavern owner noted that recently, this group had been spending lavishly, ordering expensive liquor and food, far beyond their usual means. When the owner expressed surprise, they had bragged about coming into a fortune. The timing was perfect. The flashing of cash, the stalking, the sudden wealth. The police felt the tumblers of the lock clicking into place. They tracked down Zhao Lishang and brought him in for interrogation. Zhao admitted he had seen Huang's money at the tavern. He admitted he was jealous of it, but when the topic turned to murder, he vehemently denied involvement. However, his body language screamed deceit. His eyes darted around the room. He sweated. He stammered. When asked about the source of his group's sudden wealth, he claimed it was labor wages, a lie, easily disproven, as none of them held steady jobs. The police pressed harder, convinced they had their killer, but Zhao held out. Realizing they needed to break the group apart to get the truth, the police went after his associates. They discovered that the 4 other members of the gang had fled their homes immediately after Zhao was detained. Flight is often a confession of guilt. A manhunt ensued. 2 days later, the police captured the remaining 4 members: Feng, Yang, Tian, and Yong. They were young, terrified, and inexperienced. Unlike the hardened criminals the police expected, these boys were shaking in the interrogation room. It was the youngest member, Li Yong, who broke first. "I want to tell the truth," he stammered. What he revealed would spin the investigation in a completely new direction. Li Yong sat in the interrogation chair, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the metal table. The air in the room was stale, thick with cigarette smoke and the sweat of nervous men. He took a shaky breath and began to dismantle the police's theory piece by piece. He admitted that on the evening of June 10, 1971, he and his gang had indeed targeted the Huang farmhouse. They knew Huang Huanu had recently sold livestock and was flush with cash. It was supposed to be a simple burglary. As the youngest and most agile member of the group, Li Yong had been elected as the scout. His job was to creep up to the property, peer through the windows, and ensure the family was asleep before signaling the others to move in. Under the cover of a moonless night, Li Yong had navigated the muddy paths between the rice paddies, approaching the isolated farmhouse with the stealth of a feral cat. But when he reached the perimeter, he froze. The house was not silent. Through the thin paper of the window screens, he saw the flickering of movement. He crouched low in the tall grass, his heart hammering against his ribs. Inside, silhouettes danced against the dim light. It was a man and a woman, but they were not moving with the casual rhythm of residents preparing for bed. Their movements were frantic, sharp, and aggressive. They were ransacking the place. Li Yong watched in paralyzed silence as the two figures emerged from the front door moments later. The darkness obscured their facial features, but he could clearly make out their physical statures. The man was of average height, standing roughly 5 feet 7 inches tall. The woman was significantly shorter, appearing to be less than 5 feet 3 inches. They carried bundles likely filled with the very cash Li Yong's gang had come to steal, and vanished quickly into the night, moving with a familiarity that suggested they knew the terrain well. After they disappeared, curiosity overcame fear. Li Yong crept closer and slipped inside the still open door. He expected to find a sleeping family who had just been robbed. Instead, the metallic scent of blood hit him first. He stumbled into the bedroom and saw the carnage Wei Qiandi and the little girl slaughtered in their beds. Terror washed over him. He scrambled out of the house, his legs pumping furiously as he ran back to the rendezvous point where his cohorts were waiting. Breathless and pale, he told Zhao Lisheng and the others what he had seen. The gang was spooked. They were thieves, delinquents, and brawlers, but they were not murderers. They knew that if they were caught anywhere near a double homicide, they would face the firing squad. They made a pact of silence. They would never speak of the Huang house again. However, the adrenaline of the night and the greed that drove them was still unsatisfied. Denied their prize at the Huang residence, the gang decided not to waste the night. They shifted their target to another wealthy home in a neighboring village. That second burglary was successful, netting them a substantial amount of cash. This revelation explained everything. It explained why they had so much money to spend at the tavern. It explained their evasiveness and fear when arrested. They were guilty of burglary, yes, but they were innocent of the massacre in Anhe Village. The police verified the second burglary report from the neighboring village, and the timeline matched Li Yong's confession perfectly. The Gang of Five was cleared of the murder charges. The investigation was back to square one, but with a vital new lead. A mystery couple. A man around 5 feet 7 inches and a petite woman. The detectives returned to the village, their focus shifting to finding this pair. Who in the village fit that description? Who had a relationship with the Huang family? Once again, Shi Wangjiang, the victim's best friend and the man who discovered the bodies, stepped forward to assist. He seemed eager to help the police catch the monsters who had killed his friend. He sat down with the lead detective, his face etched with sorrow and contemplation. Shi lowered his voice, acting as if he were sharing a shameful secret. He told the police that his late friend, Huang Huanu, had confided in him about a deep suspicion. Huang believed his wife, Wei Qiandi, was having an illicit affair. Xie claimed that Huang had suspected a man in the village named Lu Ke. It was a tantalizing lead. A love triangle often ended in blood. If Wei Qiandi and her lover had conspired to kill her husband and child to start a new life, it would explain the brutality and the personal nature of the crime. Perhaps the robbery Li Yong saw was actually the lovers fleeing after the deed. The police immediately brought Lu Ke in for questioning. Lu Ke was a 36-year-old villager who lived a quiet life. When accused of the affair, he was stunned. He admitted he knew Wei Qiandi, everyone in the village knew everyone, but he vehemently denied any romantic involvement. He insisted he had barely spoken 10 words to her in private. The detectives grilled him for hours, but Lu Ke's story never wavered. More importantly, physical reality contradicted Xie Wangzhang's tip. Li Yong had been very specific about the heights of the suspects, a man of 5'7" and a small woman. Lu Ke was a short man, standing barely over 5 feet 2 inches. Even in the dark, the height difference between him and the male suspect Li Yong described would have been obvious. Furthermore, Lu Ke had a solid alibi for the night of the murder, corroborated by his own family. Lu Ke was released. The crime of passion theory dissolved, leaving the police frustrated. They were chasing ghosts in a village where secrets seemed to be buried as deep as the roots of the ancient trees surrounding them. Desperate for a break, the investigators decided to re-examine the physical evidence with a finer comb. They went back to the community, leveraging the most powerful surveillance tool available in rural China, the observant eyes of the neighbors. In a place like Anhe Village, privacy was a foreign concept. Neighbors knew what you cooked for dinner, when you argued with your spouse, and exactly what you wore. The detective showed photos of the clothing found on Huang Huanu's body when he was pulled from the river. They asked the villagers if they noticed anything unusual. One sharp-eyed neighbor, a woman who lived just a few doors down from the Huangs, pointed to the shoes in the photograph. They were a sturdy pair of cloth shoes, relatively new. "That is strange," she remarked, frowning. Huang Huanu was a very frugal man. He was known for being tight with money. He rarely bought anything for himself, especially not new shoes. He would wear his old ones until they fell apart. She explained that whenever a villager bought something new, it was a topic of conversation. If Huang had bought new shoes, he would have either bragged about the bargain or complained about the cost, but no one recalled seeing him in these shoes before. If Huang didn't buy them, where did they come from? And why was he wearing them when he died? The police noted this anomaly. It suggested that someone else might have dressed the body, perhaps to stage the scene. While the shoes were a puzzle, the next clue came from a detail so mundane, it almost slipped through the cracks. During a routine inventory of the Huang family's assets, part of the procedure to determine if anything else had been stolen, a neighbor mentioned the livestock. The Huang family kept chickens, ducks, and a hutch of rabbits. The neighbor, who often helped feed the animals, noted that the count was off. The Huang family had 5 rabbits, but now there were only 4. A single male rabbit, a large buck used for breeding, was missing. At first glance, a missing rabbit seemed irrelevant in a double homicide case. A fox could have taken it, or it could have escaped during the chaos. But seasoned detectives know that in a staged crime scene, the smallest incongruity is often the thread that unravels the entire tapestry. They began asking around specifically about the rabbit. A local woman provided a critical answer. She told police that on the day before the murder, she had been chatting with Wei Qiandi. During their conversation, Wei Qiandi mentioned that she had lent their male rabbit to a friend to breed with a female rabbit. "Who did she lend it to?" the detective asked. "She said she lent it to Xie Wangzhang," the woman replied. "He wanted to breed it with his sister's rabbits." The name Xie Wangzhang rang a bell that was becoming deafeningly loud. Xie Wangzhang, the discoverer of the bodies. Xie Wangzhang, the man who pointed the police toward the tavern gang. Ji Wangzhang, the man who suggested the false lead about the affair with Lu Ke. Every road seemed to lead back to the helpful best friend. The police immediately traveled to the neighboring village to interview Xie Wangzhang's sister. They asked her a simple question. "Do you raise rabbits?" She looked at them with confusion. "No," she said, "I have never raised rabbits. I don't even have a hutch." The lie was exposed. Xie Wangjiang had borrowed the rabbit under a false pretense. But why? Why lie about a rabbit? And where was it now? The detectives returned to the station and pulled Xie Wangjiang's file. They needed to understand the true nature of his relationship with the victim. On the surface, they were best friends, sworn brothers who worked the fields together. But deep history often holds deep grudges. Digging into village records and interviewing elders, they uncovered an incident from 2 years prior. It was a story of humiliation that had been festering in the dark. 2 years ago, Xi Wangjiang and Huang Huanu had conspired to steal millet and chickens from the collective village storehouse. It was a time of scarcity, and hunger drove them to theft. However, the theft was discovered. Terrified of the severe punishment that awaited them, which could include public shaming, beatings, or imprisonment, Huang Huanu had panicked. To save his own skin, Huang had confessed to the village leaders immediately. He downplayed his own role and placed the bulk of the blame on Xie Wangjiang. Because Huang had confessed and cooperated, his punishment was lenient, a slap on the wrist. Xie Wangjiang, however, took the fall. He was publicly branded a thief. In a tight-knit rural community, this was a social death sentence. He was paraded in front of the village, criticized, and humiliated. His reputation was shattered. For months, he walked with his head down, enduring the whispers and sneers of his neighbors. The friendship ostensibly recovered. She eventually seemed to forgive Huang. They resumed their partnership, eating together and working together. But the police now suspected this forgiveness was a mask. The Chinese have a saying, "A gentleman takes revenge, 10 years is not too late." Xie Wangjiang had been biding his time, swallowing his anger, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The profile was fitting. Xie Wangjiang was 5 feet 7 inches tall. His wife, the police realized with a jolt, was a petite woman, barely 5 feet tall. They matched Li Yong's description of the shadows perfectly. Armed with this convergence of evidence, the lies, the motive, the physical description, and the missing rabbit, the police obtained a search warrant for Xie Wangjiang's home. They descended on his house without warning. Xi was surprised, but maintained his composure, playing the role of the grieving friend. The police tore the house apart. They weren't looking for a bloodied axe or a knife. They knew those had been disposed of. They were looking for something much smaller, something Xie might have overlooked. In a dark corner of the kitchen, swept into a dust pile behind a pile of firewood, a forensic officer found it, a clump of animal fur. It was coarse, white and gray fur, rabbit fur. They bagged the evidence and brought Xie Wangjiang into the interrogation room. This time, there was no tea, no friendly chat. The atmosphere was icy. The lead detective placed the bag of rabbit fur on the table. "We spoke to your sister, Xie," the detective said cold. "She doesn't raise rabbits. So why did you lie to Wei Qiandi to get this animal? And where is it now?" Xie Wangjiang's face twitched. The mask of the helpful neighbor began to crack. He opened his mouth to spin another lie, perhaps to claim he ate the rabbit, but the detective cut him off. "We know about the theft 2 years ago," the officer continued, his voice rising. "We know how Huang betrayed you. We know you hate him. And we have a witness who saw a man of your height and a woman of your wife's height inside the house that night." Xie Wangjiang sat frozen. The weight of the investigation, the accumulation of his own contradictions, and the unexpected discovery of the rabbit fur pressed down on him. The arrogance that had allowed him to direct the police investigation for days evaporated, replaced by the crushing reality of the firing squad. He looked at the rabbit fur, then at the detectives. His shoulders slumped. The defiance left his eyes. "I didn't want to kill the child," he whispered, his voice trembling. The confession of Xie Wangjiang was not merely an admission of guilt. It was the unraveling of a meticulously constructed psychological thriller. As he spoke, the mask of the simple, grieving farmer dissolved completely, revealing a cold, calculating narcissist driven by a festering wound of humiliation. To understand the brutality of the night of June 10th investigators had to look back 2 years to the root of the rot. The incident involving the stolen millet and chickens was not a minor anecdote. It was the catalyst for everything. In rural Chinese society, the concept of mianzi, or face, is paramount. It represents one's dignity, social standing, and moral authority. When Huang Huanu confessed to the theft and shifted the blame onto Xie to save himself, he didn't just get Xie in trouble, he destroyed Xie's face. Xie described the aftermath of that betrayal with a simmering intensity. He had been paraded before the village, labeled a thief, and ostracized. The economic consequences were severe. No one would hire a known thief for day labor. His family fell into poverty, and he felt the stinging judgment of his neighbors every time he walked down the street. Huang, meanwhile, had escaped with a light penalty and continued to prosper, his reputation largely intact. For 2 years, Xie Wangzhang lived in the shadow of this disgrace. He watched Huang's life return to normal, while his own remained in ruins. The injustice gnawed at him until it calcified into a singular, obsidian resolve. He would not just kill Huang, he would destroy his legacy and frame him as a monster, ensuring that Huang would be remembered not as a victim, but as a filicide who slaughtered his own blood. But Xi knew he could not accomplish this alone. He needed an accomplice, someone who shared his capacity for violence, but lacked the connection to the victim that would draw suspicion. He turned to the person closest to him, his wife, Xu Chaoxian. Xu Chaoxian was known in the village for her volatile temper. She was a woman of sharp edges and quick anger. She knew exactly how to manipulate her. He could not simply ask her to help him kill a man over a past grievance. He needed to make it personal for her. He needed to weaponize her jealousy. Xi spun a grotesque lie. He told his wife that Wei Qiandi, Huang's wife, had developed an obsessive romantic infatuation with him. He claimed that Wei Qiandi was relentlessly pursuing him and had even suggested that if Xie were to kill his own wife, Xu Chaoxian, they could finally be together. It was a masterclass in manipulation. Upon hearing this fabrication, Xu Chaoxian did not doubt her husband. Instead, she was consumed by a blinding, murderous rage. The idea that another woman was plotting her death to steal her husband flipped a switch in her psyche. She didn't just agree to the murder plot, she became an enthusiastic partner in it. The target was no longer just a rival family. It was a woman she believed wanted her dead. With his wife on board, she began the preparations. Every step was designed to eliminate variables and ensure silence. Their first move was tactical. The Huang family owned a dog, a loyal animal that would bark at any intruder. A few days before the planned attack, Xie poisoned the animal. Its death was dismissed by the Huangs as bad luck or illness, but in reality, it was the removal of the first line of defense. Next came the issue of forensics. Xie was intelligent enough to know that footprints were a primary method of investigation. He knew that if he wore his own shoes to the murder scene, the distinct wear pattern could be traced back to him. So he went to the market and bought a pair of brand new cloth shoes. He carefully measured them to fit his own feet, but ensured they were a style that Huang might plausibly wear. The plan was diabolical. He would wear these shoes to commit the murders, ensuring that any bloody footprints left behind would not match his everyday footwear. Then, in a final act of framing, he would place these shoes on Huang's corpse. On the morning of June 10th, the trap was set. Xie Wangzhang approached Huang Huanu with a smile, the picture of the reconciled best friend. He told Huang that he had acquired a special, potent herbal medicine that was excellent for treating chronic back pain, an ailment Huang frequently complained about. He invited Huang to his house that evening to try it. Huang, unsuspecting and trusting, arrived at Xie's home at dusk. He was welcomed warmly. Xie poured him a cup of water and handed him the medicine. In reality, these were potent sleeping pills Xie had stockpiled. Huang swallowed them without hesitation. Within 30 minutes, the drugs took hold. Huang's speech slurred, his eyelids grew heavy, and he collapsed into a deep, chemically induced coma. She and his wife dragged Huang's unconscious body into a back room and locked the door. Phase 1 was complete. The father was neutralized. Now, they turned their attention to the mother and child. Under the cover of darkness, Shi Wangjiang and Xu Chaoshan made the short walk to the Huang residence. Shi wore the new cloth shoes. He carried an axe he had taken from his own kitchen, while Xu Chaoxian concealed a sharp knife in her clothing. They arrived at the farmhouse. The door was unlocked. Inside, Wei Qiandi was preparing for bed. When she saw Shay and his wife enter, she was surprised but not alarmed. These were neighbors, friends. She immediately deployed the second layer of his deception. He knew that the couple's 3-year-old daughter, Xiao Ya, had been suffering from stomach issues recently. He feigned concern, asking about the child's health. When Wei Qiandi expressed her worry, Xu Qiaoxian stepped in. She told the anxious mother that the child's stomachache was caused by internal heat in the mother's breast milk. She offered Wei Qiandi a nutritional supplement that she claimed would cool the blood and cure the child's ailment. Driven by maternal concern, Wei Qiandi took the pills, the same sedatives that had incapacitated her husband. She drank the tea, leaving the cups that would later puzzle the police on the table. The four of them sat for a while, maintaining the facade of a neighborly visit. As the drugs began to pull Wei Qiandi into a stupor, she apologized for her drowsiness and retreated to the bedroom to lie down next to her sleeping daughter. Shay and Shu waited in the living room, listening to the rhythm of her breathing. When the house fell completely silent, they moved. They entered the bedroom. The air was heavy with the stillness of sleep. Shay Wangjiang approached the bed where Wei Qiandi lay. He raised the axe. There was no hesitation, only the release of 2 years of pent-up hatred. He brought the weapon down with savage force. The first blow was likely fatal, but the rage demanded more. He struck her again and again, obliterating the face of the woman whose husband had humiliated him. The violence of the attack roused the 3-year-old child, Xiao Ya. The little girl woke up to the sound of wet thuds and the smell of copper. She began to cry out. In that moment, Shi Wangjiang's humanity was tested, and it failed. He lunged across the bed and clamped his hand over the child's mouth, stifling her screams. He held her down, her small body thrashing against his grip. "Do it," he hissed to his wife. Xu Qiaoxian, fueled by the lie that this family wanted to destroy her, stepped forward. She drew the knife she had brought. With a chilling efficiency, she stabbed the child in the abdomen. The little girl's struggles ceased. Silence returned to the farmhouse, heavier than before. Now began the macabre theater of the cover-up. The couple began to ransack the house, pulling out drawers and scattering clothes to simulate a burglary gone wrong. They found the cash Huang had bragged about, but they left some of it behind to make the scene look chaotic and hurried. But the centerpiece of their plan was yet to be executed. They needed to link the murders to Huang Huanu. They needed blood evidence that would place the guilt on the father. This was where the rabbit came in. Before leaving his own house, Xie had taken the male rabbit he had borrowed. He had slaughtered the animal and collected its blood in a container. Now, back at his own home, where Huang was still unconscious, Xie prepared the final stage. He and his wife returned to their house. Huang Huanu was still comatose in the locked room. They dragged him out. They took the container of rabbit blood and smeared it onto Huang's clothes. They wiped it on his sleeves and his chest, creating the illusion that he had been in close proximity to a violent struggle. Under the cloak of the deepest part of the night, when the village was sound asleep, they carried Huang's limp body toward the river. The man was heavy, dead weight, but adrenaline gave them strength. When they reached the riverbank, they performed the final act of the frame-up. Shi Wangjiang took off the new cloth shoes he had worn during the murders, the shoes that were now covered in microscopic blood spatter and dust from the crime scene. He slipped them onto Huang's feet. Then, they pushed Huang Huanu into the dark, swirling water. The cold shock of the water might have roused him for a fleeting second, or perhaps he passed from sleep to death without ever knowing the betrayal that had befallen him. He drowned in the darkness, framed for the murder of the family he loved. She and Shu returned to their home. They burned the container that held the rabbit blood. They cleaned themselves. They went to sleep. The next morning, Xie Wangjiang woke up and walked to his neighbor's house, acting the part of the concerned friend. He discovered the bodies. He screamed. He cried. He led the police on a wild goose chase, pointing them toward the tavern gang, toward the imaginary lover Liu Kei, and carefully steering them away from the truth. He had thought of everything: the shoes, the motive, the alibi, the forensic countermeasures. He had constructed a perfect crime. But he had forgotten to sweep behind the firewood stack, the clump of rabbit fur, a remnant of the animal he slaughtered to frame his friend, was the loose thread that unraveled the entire tapestry. When the police presented the confession to Xu Xiaoxian, she collapsed. Her defense was one of manipulation. She screamed that she had only done it because she believed Wei Qiandi wanted to kill her. When investigators told her that was a lie invented by her husband to use her as a weapon, she went silent. The realization that she had butchered a child for a fabrication broke her. The investigation was closed. The robbery was a sham. The suicide was a murder. The grieving best friend was the architect of the annihilation. The case of the Anhe Village massacre was officially solved. The files were wrapped, the evidence catalogued. But for the villagers of Shuncheng County, the horror would linger for generations. They had seen the face of evil, and it wasn't a stranger lurking in the dark. It was the smiling neighbor who came for tea. This case stands as a chilling reminder that the most dangerous monsters often hide in plain sight, wearing the masks of our closest friends. Xie Wangjiang's ability to harbor a grudge for 2 years and execute such a complex, cold-blooded plan is truly terrifying. It forces us to ask, how well do we really know the people we trust? What are your thoughts on Xu Xiaoxian's role? She was manipulated, yes, but she also held the knife that ended a child's life. Do you think she deserved the same fate as her husband? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this deep dive compelling, please hit that like button and subscribe for more true crime investigations from around the world. Stay safe.